There are a lot fewer two-parent families.
What's worth more, $1 today or $1 tomorrow?
Almost nobody gets out of love alive.
Prisoners' rights is out of sight, out of mind.
Is your brain on God?
You ain't ready to
There are discussions
how
as
they thought
black families have to have them.
What's worth more, $1 today or $1 tomorrow? What's worth more, $1
Welcome, folks, to your Reality Gurus, the show where we take a commonsensical approach to issues through complex conversation. I'm your host, G. Cleve. If you like this content, man, go ahead and like, share, subscribe. Hit that alert there so you can get these notifications as soon as this good content comes out. Now, today we have a topic that, not only makes me feel uncomfortable, I really didn't want to get into it, but, here at Reality Gurus, we don't shy away from the tough topics. We get into it, but got a couple of guys here, and we're going to introduce this topic now. This was, fellas, well, first off, let's get you guys in here. DB, Anye, Ian, good morning, fellas. How y'all doing?
Good morning. What's up?
All right, so I wake up the other day, and I'm on Facebook, and this video scrolls by. There was this young, maybe in her 20s, white woman, and she was... the video was her making the case for pedophilia and how it's a sexual preference. I was pretty disgusted, at first watch of this video, and then it prompted this particular conversation we're going to have now, simply because there's some individuals here that know a little bit more about this pedophilia thing, and I want to kind of get into it. So whoever wants to grab it first, go ahead and do so. I'm ready to listen.
You know what? And I hate to be the first one to start this topic, especially after you say individuals that know a little bit more. But I'm gonna say this, that based on the video that you talked about, I actually digged into the video a little bit more. I could say some of the points actually that she makes are not as crazy as some people might make it out to be. I think that one part is kind of unjustifiable, which is why the reason that they used it. But overall, some things I do think is valid, which I think we're going to get into. But one of the things that automatically, since you say sexual preference, I kind of feel like that's a term we need to get away from, because I think it muddles this whole conversation up when you say preference, because that means something you prefer. Compared to like something like sexual orientation, which is your starting point. This is something that kind of is a little bit different. And it refers to preference, where it kind of messes up the whole conversation. But I'm going to pass it off for now. But that is my initial thoughts.
Before I let you off the hook.
All right.
Before I let you
I'm probably going to come back around, but go ahead.
Well, just because I don't want to miss this point. So what we're talking about here is this woman in this video suggesting that pedophilia could be a normal thing. I want to be clear about that, people. If I wasn't clear about that before, this is what we're talking about. The case that pedophilia may be one day something that's considered normal. All right, so DB.
Well, let me jump on that, because all right, so this is some of the points that she made that I thought about. Like, first of all, according to her numbers, and I'm not just going to take it from her, because I watched the second video after that. I actually watched 3, but the first 2 was psychologists who kind of had the same ideas around pedophilia, similar to what you mentioned. One is that basically 1 out of 2 men have feelings of pedophilia, I think the status was. But that doesn't mean that they necessarily act on it. There's a separation they make between the desires of pedophilia to a certain degree and the ones that actually act it out. They also try to make a line between child abuse and just the overall feelings. Another one is basically just the idea of the amount of people, or the difference between pedophilia and maybe certain things that we think of like pedophilia, such as molestation. meaning that a lot of people who molest people are not necessarily pedophiles. There might be other situations within that actually happens.
All right.
So I mean, that's the arguments they're making. That's not shit I agree with.
Okay.
But
let's-
yeah.
So fellas, let me throw this question in real quick. What exactly or how are we defining pedophilia so that we don't confuse our audience?
So if you define it by how it's defined in the dictionary, which is very simple, it's one sentence. It's a person, an adult who has sexual attraction to children, right? That is his definition, right? That's it. When you look at it that way, just an adult, and then it really depends because we're talking about American society now. So an adult is categorized by somebody who is 18 and older, right? Has a sexual attraction to children, which would be categorized as someone who is 17 and under, right? So there's a lot to discuss with that topic because if you're talking about 18-year-olds and 16-year-olds, that's a lot different than 45-year-olds and 6-year-olds.
Correct. I agree.
That's big. Yeah.
I agree. We just off cam, Dane and I had a brief conversation about that. But we'll get into that in a minute. So now that, are we using the Webster's definition of pedophilia, or do you guys have another definition that you guys want to put out there?
I mean, it's pretty much the same. Like when I was trying to break down pedophilia, the origin of it is Greek and pious, which means child, and pedo, which means loving. So it's pretty much the same thing, loving a child. That is basic all around, I believe.
Okay, so Ian, real quick. So now in these, in where this is acceptable, right? What do they consider a child? Although they don't even, bring child into the situation in the areas where this is accepted.
Well, if you take it from his Grecian origins, you have to understand Greek society, right? One of its most famous philosophers stated about the society was that the closest that you will achieve your relationship to God, right, or the relationship to God, a person, the closest that you will see a relationship to God, the most amount of success that you can have trying to visualize a relationship with God is the love between a man and a boy, right? So that's kind of how you shape your views around pedophilia, because it was just something that was a staple of the Grecian culture, which was relationships between older men and boys as young as 8-9 years old, right? So if you want to take it from that approach, then you get into sexual orientation as a whole, as whether or not pedophilia is anything different than homosexuality, is anything different than heterosexuality. If it's just your attraction and your need for a relationship with somebody, right? And in this case, it happens to be a person that is considered adolescent. How do you determine harm, right? Is there a harmful aspect of just a man or a woman saying to themselves, I am attracted, or looking at a 8-year-old woman or 8-year-old girl or boy and saying that I find them attractive, right? Just that, nothing outside of that, but just that.
So basically, you're not talking about the physical act. You're just talking about the initial desire, pretty much.
Because once you add physicality to it, right, then you're not really talking about pedophilia. You're talking about rape or molestation, the act of non-consensual physical relationship. Which, if it happens between, if I happen to see a woman and she's 35 years old, and I act out my sexual desires on her without her consent, it is just as much rape as it is if I act out sexual desires on an 8-year-old girl. You see what I'm saying? There's no distinction between the ages. It seems worse because it's an 8-year-old girl, but it's still.
So now,
no.
when we talk about consensual, though, right? Because I just found out recently that within America itself, even though we have legal age at 18, with parental consent, judicial consent of pregnancy in a lot of states, you can still marry pretty young, from anywhere to like 13 on up. And I think there's like 32 jurisdictions where you can't marry that young. Somebody from an older age can marry that young. But then you put into the question of child development. So even if it's a consensual agreement, isn't there still a weighing of the difference between the development of somebody who's grown, who their mind has already latched on, to somebody who's still growing that might cause damage?
Now,
Well, take it. If you look at it, let's take a look at it from just the societal aspect, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have 13-year-old boys who are sentenced to lifetime prison sentences for adult crimes, right? So what we're saying there is that a 13-year-old is capable of making rational decisions as an adult, right?
Well, personally, I disagree with that law as well.
I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm just saying that it does happen, and it happens very often, right? So if you're going to say that a 13-year-old boy or girl is capable of making rational decisions regarding crime, criminality, then you also have to concede that a 13-year-old boy or girl is capable of making decisions regarding romance and sexuality, right? Because they're both passion, they're both emotion driven, right? So
yeah, but you're talking about for people who accept a child being able to, or being charged as an adult because they were able to make that decision. If you're saying someone who believes that has to also consider this other situation, right, with the pedophilia. Okay, cool.
That's as a society, like, because as a society, whenever a 13-year-old or 14-year-old boy or girl is sentenced as an adult, there's no pitchforks, there's no rioting. We don't. It happens sometimes, but as a society, right, as a whole, right, the country is not up in arms. The country is not, making it a case where, this is unignorable. It just doesn't happen. And 14-year-old boys are sentenced to adult prison sentences every day. So
then now I have to ask, because now we're talking about society, because society in itself is against the idea of pedophilia. But like I said, judicial-wise, you're still able to marry pretty young with certain conditions and with certain consent. So how does that weigh out? Like, how can you be against the sexual act between a young person and an older person, but still good with marriage of them?
It seems like a contradiction, right? Yeah. And it's, when you think about it, it's kind of unfair, right? Especially to men, right? So it's one of these kind of, I was saying, I had this conversation at work with a group of my coworkers, and I just did a test, right? So I walked up to them and said, yo, this girl just walked by, man, she was like 13, and man, and as soon as I said that, he said, yo, what are you talking? Hey, what are you talking about, right? But let's introduce that differently, right? So the girl walks by, and you don't see her face. You just see the body. She's wearing booty shorts, right? She walks by. She has curves like a grown woman. She walks like a grown woman, carries herself like a grown woman. And you run up on her, and you see her face, and she's like 13, obviously like 13, right? You can just tell, look at her face, and you're like, oh man. But biologically, right? Biologically, if this woman is 13 or 14, this girl is 13 or 14, most likely she's ready to bear children, biologically, right? So biologically, by nature, she is an adult. She's ready to bear children. And what caused us as men to go after her is nature, biological wiring. We see something, the hunter kicks in, let's go get it. Then society kicks in. See the 13-year-old face, whoa, that's unacceptable, right? But biologically, without those constructs, the sociological constructs, you probably would have gone through it. If you grew up in a society that says 13-year-olds are fair game, then what would stop you, right? And we had that. Like I said, we had thousands of years, and it still happens right now. There are still countries, especially like in India, in a lot of different countries in Africa, where women as young as 13 years old are entered into marriage, whether they be arranged or some of them in consensual marriages, and they become part of a family unit, and they're rearing children by the time they're 14 or 15 years old, which biologically they're able to do. So that conversation, if you introduce it as, hey man, I saw this girl, she had a fat butt, this and that, whatever, and then the guys are all into it, like, oh yeah, what she look like, yeah, and then you end it with, yeah, she's 13 though. All of a sudden, they were all into it. Everybody's into it at first. Man, oh, she had the apple bottom, whatever you're gonna say. You know, she had the olive skin tone and this and that. And then as soon as you enter, but she's 13, right? Then all of a sudden it's off. Game is over. But everything about the woman, game was on until you mentioned that she was 13. So how do you navigate that, right? How do you feel about that in your own mind, that you yourself, any one of you three can see a 13-year-old girl on the street, not know that she's 13, right? And she appears to be 20, 23, 20, however old you might think she is. And biologically, you are sexually attracted to, right? And then when you find out her age, then the game is off. You see what I'm saying?
I'm going to open this up for everybody else, but I think with me, the main difference is knowing that they're 13, knowing that biologically, that even though they might be physically ready, they might not be mentally ready. That's for me. I'll say it kind of the same way, like even with the scenario that you have, there's also different factors. So if you had the same scenario with somebody that is older, that is acceptable, society standards and my own, that if they had that fat butt and everything else, and say they turn around and they're ugly, now I have another factor, and then I kind of might shy away a little bit because I'm not attracted to them in that manner. The same thing, I think, to a certain degree with the 13-year-old. Once I see that now they're physically young from the backside, that changes factors because now you have more information to work with. That is probably, I think, the only thing the difference is when we talk about once you put age into it, because there are other factors that you put into it when you actually start talking about it. You might have that initial physical reaction just by seeing a booty because we're men, but then when you put the other shit into it, then that changes a lot of things.
Hold on for a minute.
You know what I mean?
Hold on for a second.
Yeah. Oh.
So in that little clip, the video with the woman, she suggested that, what was the percentage? 2 out of every how many men?
She said 1 out of two.
1 out of every.
But I'm let me clear that up a little bit, because another video I was watching, they were saying that for as far as those statistics go, that that is only because they really only tested men. They haven't tested women as much. So percentages might change overall about pedophilia. I know that.
No, what? Because
what you're about to say.
Because I'm saying, because this is what I'm going to say. So if we're going to accept that there is a, whatever the ratio is, whether it's 1 to 2, 5 to 1, 10 to 1, whatever it is, right? If we're going to accept that there is a ratio, and that we're talking about just those thoughts, not necessarily going through with the act, wouldn't what Ian was just suggesting convict all of us? If we were all at one with the situation he's discussing, just a female walking down in a mall somewhere, you don't see her face, you just see curves, right? So if initially we have that attraction biologically, right? But then we find out that she's 13 and we're like, okay, and we don't move forward with talking to her, we still are within this ratio that this woman's talking about because we didn't go forward with the act. Wouldn't that convict us all? Wouldn't that convict us all?
I mean, that I think is what the tricky part about pedophilia is. That's why I think there has to be. Well, I think that's why they make that separation between just the feelings of pedophilia and the act of pedophilia.
I think that's worse though.
That's
I think this. I don't want to talk about the guys who happen to see a female who looks like a grown woman. That's not fair, and in my opinion, it really isn't. I'm talking about the individuals that would see that woman or see that female that looks like a woman, find out that she's not, she's underage, and still go ahead and push. Those are the cats that I'm talking about. I mean, we all would be guilty.
But again, that would be the act, right? I mean, like, say, like, even that person know that there was 13 and it was still attracted, but they didn't push on it. Like, maybe that would still be pedophilia technically.
By not pushing?
By not pushing, but they're still attracted, even if they're 13. That I think is what I'm getting from a lot of this information that I'm getting, is that not everybody that has feelings of pedophilia, like who confesses openly to whoever, that they have these feelings for younger people. And we see this with the child marriage, even though that is an act, that they don't act on it. That's what I'm saying. There's people who say that they have this attraction openly for younger people, but don't act on it. That's from what I'm getting from those reports.
And we're talking about.
That's kind of problematic. That sounds like a play on words.
What are they attracted to? The physical or the age? What are they attracted to? The fact that this individual.
I would imagine both. I would imagine the age has something to play with it, and that's why I don't know if when we talking in the group text, I link it as a fetish. Quite frankly, I think it's the same thing as people that like feet and people giving hand jobs. I think it's a fucking fetish to a certain degree. The sexual part, but.
So let me ask you this question then, right? Mm-hmm. Homosexuality now is generally accepted as just a naturally occurring, right, sexual preference. Let me not say preference, sexual orientation.
Right? Wait. You said that. Say that again.
So homosexuality, right, is accepted now as a naturally occurring sexual orientation.
Meaning you're born this way, you're saying. Is that what you're saying?
It can be, right? Like, we have come to the point in society now where we accept that through whatever circumstances, right? Just as a person can be born with blonde hair and red eyes, or maybe a person can be born, with a chemical imbalance, or whatever the case is, it's still a naturally occurring, right, situation. So that homosexuality, there are people who are born with an orientation of sexuality towards the same sex, right? Now, whether it's normal or not, because for me, normal just means it makes sense, right? And maybe it does. Maybe it's a grander scheme of things where it is population control, because if you have a certain percentage of humanity which is not interested in procreation, then we don't spill out too much. Like, we don't all become China. So maybe it's written into our genetic destiny, or whatever the case is. But it does happen naturally. It happens within animals. It happens everywhere you can look at in society, in human society. It's always been present, right? So you can make the same case for pedophilia, where it has been present in human society, whoever we looked at.
For me, I don't disagree with the biological aspect, even though there is more when we talk about stuff like homosexuality. I think there is some parts of that, but there is some part that you could think about it epigenetically, meaning that the environment controls it as well. I mean, everybody got their own different avenue. Even rape is naturally occurring in the biological, fields of other animals. My thing, though, where it comes to a fine line, is when we talk about the act about it, is like, just as rape, it is damaging to the other person. And that's kind of what makes it harder to be accepted, because even biologically or mentally, whether it's a chemical imbalance or whether it's a natural occurring event, there are people that act out on it, right? There are people that just by having that initial push to that attraction, may eventually act out on it. You could say the same thing about probably serial killers or whatever else. So that is my concern when it comes to it. I don't disagree with the biological aspect or the feeling about it. Is what comes out of it at the other end.
Okay.
Pretty
All
much.
right. Do we have a an example of this? I mean, real life example, not just historically stuff that we've seen in ancient Greece or whatever. I mean, R. Kelly could that be an example of this pedophilia thing?
No, let's not use R. Kelly,
Well, okay,
man. Because
that's fine. I just want to actually use something real world, because then we can get into what the benefit of this really is. I really want to get into that shit right now. Like,
let's talk about something we can relate to, right? Let's talk about the recent uptick. Maybe it's an uptick, maybe it's not. I think it's an uptick because I think we're seeing a lot more teachers in like high school that are young now, right? It's a profession that's kind of left over into the young generation, and it's kind of creeping away from teachers that just. When I grew up, most of my teachers were like 40 plus at least. So we really didn't have an opportunity to grow up in the high school setting where you had attractive 24-year-old teachers, leading the class. And so I'm not really sure what that dynamic would have been like for me in my school. But what I can say is that I know for a fact at 16 or at 15 or even at 14 years old, if I would have had a teacher that was as attractive as some of these teachers that I've seen, I think there was recently just a situation where a 15-year-old impregnated his high school teacher, and there's like a lawsuit about it now. But I'm looking at the teacher, I'm like, damn.
right.
But Ian, just to give you an example, actually in my high school, it was the actual opposite of that. All of our teachers had just graduated college, USC and UCLA. They were all like in their early 20s. So there was a lot of attraction going on, and there were actually a lot of cases of teachers dealing with students. And we actually found out after we graduated from high school that there were a lot of relationships going on that actually became public once those students once they turned 18. So
Now,
Let's see. So now, because I think Jay was asking a question about. I mean, I kind of want to dig into that a little bit more, because when we talk about that, I think it's culturally. There's some things there when we talk about teachers. It kind of made me think about priests. And these are two fields where now you're starting to see like a lot of sexual abuse. You kind of been seeing it with the priests, but like with the teachers, where I think there's some things culturally there as well. But just to Jay's point, what is the benefit besides the sexual act? Like, I guess maybe for the teenager, it might be pleasure just having this older woman body, but is that the only thing when we talk about pedophilia that you could get from it?
who'd you?
I mean, if you're a 14-year-old boy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Typically as a 14-year-old boy, maybe you have a girlfriend, but most likely it starts to become, the puberty kicks in, and your testosterone is starting to peak, and it becomes this urge, this pulsating urge for you to delve into the world of non-virginity, right? So I think the dynamic between the attractive female teacher and the young 14 or 15-year-old boy it's different
Yeah.
than the dynamic between the 25-year-old male teacher and the 14-year-old female, right? Because of our biological workings. I don't think the 14-year-old female is like, yeah, I gotta get it. I haven't really seen too many 14-year-old females that, outside of abusive household or daddy issues or whatever else is going on, just in regular, somewhat loving, somewhat what we would consider normal households, they're out there like, yeah, I gotta get it, hunting men. Where you do see 14 and 15-year-old boys hunting, 14 and 15-year-old girls or whatever woman. So I think that plays into it a little bit. But the benefit would be the same benefit as the 14 and 15-year-old boy having a relationship sexually with another 14 or 15-year-old girl, right?
See, I mean, this is why I say culturally, because I always kind of I remember having this conversation with Ye a little bit about around the beginning of the Me Too movement, and I kind of lumped this up because mainly a lot of this you do see, well, at least with me, like I don't know if it's an uptick or not, but I see more of women being implicated as the older party, as the teachers that are putting into men, and I still felt it to be some kind of relation to the Me Too movement in the way that is the power structure is played, meaning that it's somebody using their power to push somebody else. So if you have an older teacher who maybe is 30 something, messing with the 15-year-old, there's still an imbalance regardless. Like even though biologically we might be different, he could take it as an honor, but if he's that young, he still has a lot of things biologically that is not worked out, that is being affected by this older person kind of using their power against them. That's why I even link it with priests to a certain degree, because it's using that power structure. So you don't think any of that has to play with it though?
I think comparing them to priests is kind of unfair, because with priests, it's almost 100% without fail little boys, grown men, little boys, right? So, and these little boys are not like, yeah, I've been homosexual since I've been able to express feelings. These are just like a lot of the times straight little boys, and priests are, basically molesting them, and that's not consensual because these boys most of the time they're not gay, right? So that is malicious intent, right? That's malicious intent. I don't think there's any malicious intent in a lot of these situations with specifically the female teacher and the high school age student. I think it's biological. I think, get a LeBron James, or you look at most of these guys, right? They're not LeBron. You look at most of these kids, and they're not like, they're not Timmy Robbins. They're not like little, right. They're not like these little boys. They look like, adolescent, but they look old enough.
So would you say it's still a matter of access? Because that is something else as well, because it's not like you see that trend necessarily overall,
right.
But you see it with teachers.
Right, because they're in each other's presence constantly, so the relationship can be cultivated.
I'll say this: we're shifting away from the side of it that if I would say I wanted to focus on any of it, but I wanted to focus more on the side of this older male and younger female, or even the older male and younger male. The older female and younger male, I'm not so bothered by, especially when.
Why is that?
Listen, let it be the double standard. I mean, that's one that I can personally accept. It just I don't know, man. I can't explain why I accept it. I just
it seems like
well, let's do that. Naturally, it feels like the right thing to do. You know what I mean? That's the right thing to do. But if it happens, I can turn a blind eye to that. It's the other side that is bothering me, and still trying to understand what place does it have in any society. Like, what place does that have anywhere? And we got into off cam. Me and DB about childbearing years for females? What is that ideal age, right? And or ideal range? And it said from 20 to 35, right? And I asked the question that did they make the decision to have the range be outside of the legal age, right? To make because there's females that having their periods at 12, right? So literally can have a child at 12 years old, but this range starts at 20. So I was asking, maybe did they consider the fact that maturity, not just we're talking about the ability to have a child, the maturity involved in that? Yeah, you're 12, and physically you could have a child, but are you mature enough to have one? Did you financially take care of one? Are those some of the things that they take into account when they come up with that range? Because I'm still trying to understand what would a 40-year-old man see in a 14-year-old girl? I don't.
Well, G, that's the thing that I think we've taken into account over the last maybe 50, 60 years in this country. A woman's maturity. Can she take care of these children? Because, I mean, our great-great-grandparents' generation, that's what they were doing. It was acceptable in this country for an older man. We can even go back to the example of the movie Color Purple, where older guys were marrying younger women. It was acceptable behavior. We understood as a society that, hey, this young woman can handle that. This young woman can bring value into your life, into the marriage that you're trying to have with her. You can be able to mold this woman,
Yeah, I think that's what it is. I think the lack of immaturity is the reason why, because it's more beneficial to the man to mold that person. Into what they want.
Now, is that necessarily a bad thing?
What I'm gonna say, Ian,
I don't think that's a bad thing. With the man being the leader, I don't think that's a bad thing at all.
Go as far as saying whether it's good or bad, but that is something that I would be able to get around to understanding if the intent was to have this individual as a mate moving on. Now, Ian, you touched on it. Something else we said off cam about the differences between, let's say, an 18-year-old male dealing with a 16-year-old female. Now, technically, in the eyes of the law, that's the statutory rape, right? But if they go on to marry, sort of like what Charlemagne and his wife wound up doing at early ages, right? Does that change things? Like, if the intent is to move on with this female as a mate, it's one thing. When you start talking about pedophilia, it just feels like targeting, like you're looking for this child. Like, it's just weird, bro. Something about it just doesn't seem right to me. And that's why I asked, what are you attracted to? Especially with the males. Are you attracted to the physical, or is it the age? Is it the age that you're attracted to?
So how do you distinguish between the two, right? So let you have now a 35-year-old man who's attracted to 30-year-old women who look like 12-year-old girls, right? Or you have a 35-year-old man who's attracted to 12-year-old girls who look like 35-year-old women, right? So is there a difference between the two, right? One is attracted physically to the appearance of children, but attracted mentally to 35-year-old woman, to the mentality, the maturity of the 35-year-old woman, the 30-year-old woman. The other is attracted physically to 35 or 30-year-old woman, but attracted mentally to the 12-year-old girl. So it's like, it's really a gray. The whole area is gray because there's so many different situations that you talk about when you're just talking about the preference, the feeling, right? The emotion behind it, not the act of non-consensual sexual encounters, but just the attraction itself, right? And I think that's what the videos were talking about, where they were talking about normalizing the fact that people are attracted, right? Just attracted, right? Just stops there, right? They weren't going beyond that, but just stopping at the attraction to children. There are men and women who are attracted to children, And
So
that's
then let me ask you something. What do you think about child pornography in itself? Because technically, I mean, there are people getting hurt because the way they use the child to get the pornography is one thing. But on the end of the pedophile, um, I guess they're feeding it to a certain degree, but they're not doing any technically physical harm in the way of actually molesting the child themselves. So would that
well,
should
I
that be
mean,
acceptable?
look at pornography itself, right? Pedophilia or not, should not be acceptable. It just shouldn't be, because when you actually look into the situation of pornography, right, it is extremely abusive to women. Extremely abusive. It preys. It's one step away from prostitution with pimping, right? Not consensual prostitution, where a woman's selling herself, but prostitution with pimping, right? The pornography industry preys on very weak-minded, desperate, low self-esteem having women, and uses them to turn a profit. And it, in many cases, if you've ever talked to I've met many porn stars, right? And they're nutcases, man. Up here, there's all something horribly wrong with their mentality, and they were probably like that as children, right? And I have to believe that as children, they probably were involved in, acts of pedophilia, right? To some certain degree. And this is how they got started in the pornography industry. So I think when you look at it that way, I think you can link porn to pedophilia, the act of.
So
Yeah, so
Listen, both.
so
No, because
go ahead, go ahead. So sooner one day off camera, you're gonna have to explain to me how you know so many porn stars. But but just real quick, so even with that, because this is my overall point. At least when we go back to the video that Jay mentioned, and I watched 3 videos. I told you, all were psychologists. 2 were ones that were pretty much making the same point that Ian talked about. I don't like the word normalizing the situation, but basically trying to find a relation between just the desire and separating the act from it. But then the third one was a child psychologist. And the third one was somebody who actually went through a pedophilic act himself, and it was a family member. And find out that basically there's a lot of pedophilia within the family, which leads to molestation, which leads to maybe situations like Ian described, which makes it harder for it to accept pedophilia because it comes out in that kind of form. So how can you really separate the two? I think that's the part that is hard for most people. How do you separate just the desire when you have this serious like act? Like even when you say with the pornography being bad and there's a lot of damaged people within it, but that damage is still coming from pedophilia
right.
most likely.
So, because I know we're running out of time, I wanna ask this question. So, Ian, you feel that even though history shows that this has existed, but I don't know. Maybe you can tell us. It's socially acceptable somewhere. Is there a society somewhere in this world where this is socially acceptable? Do you know that off front?
sure. I mean, you can take India, for example, where there's a huge push by Western society to dismantle the whole system of childhood marriages, right? But this has been in their culture since their culture has began, most likely.
Well,
Where
in terms of what
girls
they're
are,
doing with this, again, that leads more towards like how what Ani was referring to the color purple and that type of situation. Although I'm uncomfortable with that too, um, I could be a little bit more objective on that simply because you the intent is to move forward to form a union with this female, right? So it's not just a sex thing. You're talking about forming a union, children, building a life, whatever. You said that we need to get used to it because this shit is coming, right? That's what you said, right? In this country, you see it in this country. It's being socially acceptable in this country. You guys are.
Gee, they just shut down a site the other day. I forget the specific name. Some type of video chat site where they were connecting so many adults with minors, and it was like all these naked pictures on there and all this nonsense. So the feds was investigating them and trying to investigate all the people that were users on this site. So there's a whole underground world of this going on right now.
It's underground.
One thing we got to understand in this country of capitalism, it's underground right now. But just like the videos that we've just shown, there are agendas going on to normalize this and put it into society to make us see it in a whole different way. And one thing I can say about this country is if a group has an agenda, if they have money, if they're putting the right people in political power, if they're getting lawyers as well too, they can make shit happen in this country. So I'm saying, don't be surprised if we start to see that in this country within the next 10 to 15 years. The question becomes, what are we going to do about it? Those who oppose it.
Honestly, I'm not as optimistic about it as you guys are. I honestly don't see something like that being. No. So maybe optimistic wasn't the right word. I just meant on the idea of this becoming a socially acceptable thing here in this country. You guys seem pretty confident that it will get to that point, and I'm not so sure. Matter of fact, I actually think it will never happen in this country.
I'm not saying it will be totally acceptable, but I'm not saying it'll be totally acceptable, but I'm saying by a percentage of people in this country that are pushing for it, it would be acceptable amongst them. Just like other things that have been passed that 40, 50 years ago, we never thought could happen in this country have passed, and it has been normalized now.
Even with homosexuality, we're talking about legal age people now. Again, it's the underage part of it that's making me believe that it would never happen in this country. You understand that at first you start to.
But just like the example that Ian gave, if we can try a young boy in court as an adult, why they're gonna piggyback off of that same argument of hold up. Then why can't young boy make an adult decision to be with this grown man?
But here's the thing. Even with those two situations, right? One being making a conscious decision to engage in a sexual act as a minor, and one is society feeling like a child really could have had the intent, to murder somebody, so and then be put in jail for life. But I'm talking about something like not anything like that crazy. How about something a little bit more simple? I'm losing my train of thought, but I just think that shit, brothers, this shit is just making me more and more uncomfortable the more I talk about it.
Listen, man, you know what? I'm gonna say this. Like I'm with Jay on this. I feel like there's gonna be too much opposition for it to, at least for like the 50-year time frame. But I will say this: like if you go by the statistics that people say, like 1 out of 2 men are pedophiliacs. Then you have to imagine that they are in certain positions of power that
for that.
Think
about all of the things. Think about all of the things that could be affected. Like, okay, so we're talking about decision making, child. Think about contracts, entering into contracts. Right now, if you're not 18, you can't sign a contract for a car. You understand what I'm saying?
But this is what I'm saying, Jay. Like I said, like when I was saying before, that there are certain avenues like parental consent, judicial consent, where 13-year-olds can marry.
Where?
Within this country.
Where?
Not within this country.
But you said they need a parental consent. You said.
So how far off do you think it is to actually change that? If you could,
Exactly.
if a parent can actually tell you, which that means the parent already has some kind of agreement, say I'm willing to get my child. How far off do you think that it takes to change that where
I'm still
the
not.
person
I still
themselves
don't
can actually?
understand that yet. To even answer the
And we
question,
got
I
to
don't
look at the
even
fact that
understand what
we
it
got to
is
look at.
that. How is that even? So, all right. As a 13-year-old girl says she wants to marry a 40-year-old man, she has to get her mother's permission to do so. Is this? And then somehow,
That's what I'm getting.
And a lot of and a lot of places in
a
this
lot of
country right
places in
now,
this.
yeah.
Holy
And
shit,
let's
fellas!
not take it off the table that parents can be bought off by money. If this young girl is already, well, let's just say this young boy is already dealing with this older woman, and it's already known to the family, and the woman is just like, hey man, we trying to get married over here. I'll give you this money right here. Can you sign these paperwork over and we do what we do? I don't see why people wouldn't do that.
But what
I'm
does
gonna
that
give you
look
an
Not
like
making
example.
decisions
here?
off
I'm gonna give you an
off
example. Do you
morality
know?
anyway.
I'm gonna give you a public example. I don't know if you remember Ray Moore, who was I think running for Senate a while ago.
Right.
One of the things that came out with him was basically that he slept with a young child he's an old ass man. So basically he slept with his young child when she was younger, and they were trying to push that against him. I think this was in Alabama.
Yeah.
And you know what his defense was? I got parental consent, so I can't be charged with
Parental
anything.
consent to
And
do
not
what?
only that, but his supporters,
To date that young woman, to put that woman on a date and have sex with her.
And remember, the supporters backed Roy. They backed Roy Moore. They backed him. They said,
Yeah, big time.
it, as long as it was consensual, and if it is a sin, then God forgives all, and so on. Like, they backed him with it, so it wasn't like an uproar. They still voted for him. He still had the
How old
support
was she?
after all of this came out, and he admitted she was like 14.
Yeah, she was like 14, something like that. Yeah.
And he was like, what, 50 or something?
He's old as shit. He's old as shit. Yeah.
So
the agenda is real and the ball is rolling. The question becomes, what are you gonna do about it?
But I still think there's a lot of opposition. There is components you got to worry about, but I still think I'm kind of with Jay. Like, I don't think it's going to happen in 15 years.
What
I hope it
you
never
understand
happens.
the other things that have to
15 years
change?
ago.
Like what I'm saying is the other, just specifically being able to enter into a contract. That's why I don't understand about the whole marriage and the consent thing. Like, okay, so
you don't need a contract for a sexual relationship, right? What they're pushing for, right, is just as if you had homosexuality 40 years ago, which was something that was like off limits. We don't talk about that, right?
Yeah.
We don't accept it. We don't even acknowledge it. Homosexuality
it would never happen.
is the devil, right? That was the stance in America on homosexuality, right? 40 years ago, never. We don't even talk about it. 40 years later, right? This is where we are, and we're now in a society that is pushing for every inclination, emotional, spiritual, anything you can think of, right?
Yeah.
If it's inside of you, let it out, right? If you want to mutilate your testicles and turn them into a nostril on your knee, go ahead, be free, right? As long as you are not intentionally hurting anybody. And what they're saying with pedophilia now is, if a 14 or 13-year-old girl can say, I want to have sex with a 60-year-old man, I don't want to marry him, I just want to have sex with him, then let her do it. And let the 60-year-old man be free to prance in the fields with his 12-year-old girl circle, and as long as the girls are saying, this is of my free will, let it happen, right? And I can see that happening because Bruce Jenner was just Woman of the Year. How? See what I'm saying? How?
Just 20 years ago, just 20, 30 years ago, people thought that the transgender movement wouldn't have been where it is now. But look where we are. And it's going to keep developing.
We're still dealing with adult aged individuals. All these situations involve adult age individuals. You got to give me one that doesn't involve.
But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because what do you think is more important? to the fabric of the U.S., right? The age or religion, right? The Bible, right? Or age, right? So what the Bible is the staple of the American fabric. It's what the country is built on, right? Biblical notions, Christianity, right? So in the Bible itself, it says that homosexuality is an abomination. But look where it is today, right? And I'm not Christian. I don't believe in the Bible at all. So don't take it as I'm saying that homosexual is an abomination. I'm just saying that's what it says in the Bible. And look where it is in society today. So do you really think that just because age is a factor, right, that it's going to trump
only because
I don't think so,
in I need you to give me example, like put it like this. You guys can make the argument, right, with homosexuality and stuff like that because it's happening now. Yes, that was some stuff that you probably would have never thought would have been socially acceptable. There was a concerted effort to push for it to be socially acceptable, but now we see it happening. Again, I still maintain adult age. You give me a situation that involves underage children that years ago you thought never would be socially acceptable and is socially acceptable today, and then I'll consider what we're talking about now. I don't think the U.S. would nothing like that will be socially acceptable when it comes in regards to age. I just don't think it would ever happen. I honestly don't. It just because of the age. All these other things you're talking about. Soon as an adult feels like they want to get involved with that shit, then you can grab other adults and create a group, and then there's a group of motherfuckers that like that shit. But children is a little bit different. And okay, think about the
one thing this country has taught me is I can't put nothing past this country. This country evolves, and people are gonna fight for their right to live comfortably in this country. And children get more and more rights every day. If a child can put his parent in jail by just calling 911, that shows you that children are making progress in this country as well too, to the things that they can make happen.
And I think it's not that far pushed from child marriage. Like I said, you can marry at certain ages to that. I mean, it's really not. It's really not. And that's something that exists. It's something to be aware of, regardless of whatever you feel. Something to be aware of because there are people that are pushing it. Like we talked about before, there were a certain group that were campaigning to be included into the LGBTQ community by adding that P to it. So there are people that are basically campaigning to be legitimate. So it is out there. So you gotta.
Well, look, man, folks. I tell you what, we are out of time. This has been a interesting conversation to say the least. It is far from over. What I do ask is if you guys find this shit interesting, please like, share, subscribe, and definitely comment. I need to know if there's anybody that wants to talk about this and maybe feels the way maybe Ian and Anya feel like this is going to be something that's going to be the norm sooner or later. Either way, let's talk about it. I got my man DB, Ian, Anya, Reality Gurus. Folks, take care.